This is In the Trenches, broadcast 11.
Welcome to In the Trenches, where entrepreneurs, artists, writers, designers, inventors, warriors, and leaders share their stories of doing the hard, creative work that impacts all of our lives. Let the journey inspire you to do something worthwhile, build something bold, and create your life's work. And now, your host, Tom Morkis.
Welcome, everyone, to another broadcast of In the Trenches. Today's guest is my friend, John Corcoran. John is an attorney and small business advisor with the Corcoran Law Firm outside of San Francisco, where he helps entrepreneurs, business owners, and real estate investors succeed. He's also the founder of Smartbusinessrevolution, where he helps online entrepreneurs succeed, both online and off. Early in his career, John served in the White House as a speechwriter and press aide for the governor of California, for a law firm in the heart of Silicon Valley, and at one point worked in Hollywood. So yeah, that's just a quick highlight of John's background. But bottom line, this guy has a wealth of experience in writing and entrepreneurship and building relationships. And he really is an instigator, if I've ever met one. Someone who starts, finishes, and ships projects seemingly all the time, just based on the little bit that I know about him. So John, thank you so much for showing up today and meeting with us today to have this conversation.
Wow, Tom, thanks for that introduction. Yeah, no, I'm honored to be here. Thank you.
Awesome. So I'd like to get to know a little bit more about you and for the audience to get to know a little bit about you and your background. So I just really brushed over all the crazy things that you've done. You don't have to go into too much detail wherever you want, but tell us a little bit about the White House, Hollywood, and what led you to Smartbusinessrevolution.com and what you're doing today.
Yeah, it's kind of a roundabout. It's not the most normal transition, right? You know, working in Hollywood and then working in politics in the White House, and then where I am now working with business owners and entrepreneurs. But, I've always kind of followed what I'm interested in. And I started out my career working in the entertainment industry. I'm from Los Angeles originally. And I like the creative expression of it. I started working towards getting into development for, productions for TV and for film. But I had also, during college, I'd interned in the White House speechwriting office during the Clinton administration. And so I had kept in touch with some of the speechwriters there, and they called me up around the time. Actually, this was a year or two after I'd graduated from college. And there was an opportunity. There was a opportunity as a writer there in presidential letters and messages, which was kind of like a second-tier speechwriter. And so I jumped on it, and I did that near the end of the Clinton administration for almost 2 years. And it was a great opportunity. It's neat being there. You don't make very much money, but you might be on your way to the restroom and run into the president of the United States talking to the premier of China or something like that in the hallway. Right. So it's pretty unusual being there. Sure. And then that just led to I wanted to come back to California, and there was an opportunity to be speechwriter for the governor of California for Gray Davis, who was the guy who was outside of California. You may not have heard of him, but he was the guy who was recalled by Arnold Schwarzenegger. And one thing's just kind of led to another, and I ended up going back to law school and started my own law firm about a year and a half ago. So I feel like an entrepreneur, and I am an entrepreneur, and I work with clients as well. So it's kind of what I do.
Yeah, that's interesting. So what made you, I guess, from DC or back to California, what made you want to become a lawyer at that point, after all that background in speech writing and writing in particular?
Honestly, it was when I was working in politics, I had all these great people that I worked with that were very smart and very talented. And a lot of them had law degrees. A lot of them had been practicing lawyers or just had law degrees. And I saw the way they analyzed issues and the way they understood issues and understood the way the world worked. And, I'd get into heated disagreements, as tends to happen in politics, with people who had law degrees or who were lawyers. And I tended to lose to those sorts of people. And I thought, well, maybe I should go to law school so that I can brush up on my skills. And so that's kind of how it came about. And I didn't really know where it would lead me, if it would lead me back to politics or in some other direction. and it's kind of been an organic process. But one of the things was I'd always worked in government before, but I'd always felt like I wanted to do something more entrepreneurial. It just took me a while to get to that point, and so I'm glad I am where I am right now.
Absolutely. So, and then on that note, what made you transition then from, or not transition? I mean, you still practice law with your law firm, but working with, say, entrepreneurs in particular. What made you go that route as opposed to, say, going back to DC or practicing some other sort of law?
It really was. I just took a look at the work that I'd done over the beginning of my legal career, and I did a lot of civil litigation, which is really, parties fighting parties, often over money or something like that, or assets. And it's okay, it's great representing people, but it didn't feel as rewarding as it did to work with an entrepreneur who was focusing on building something. And so I just kind of started to transition my career towards that and focus my efforts towards getting those types of clients. I really like small business owners who are working their way up. I just enjoy working with them and being a part of their team. And lawyers tend to be very expensive, and but lawyers who are in small firms like myself can be more competitively priced and can really provide a greater service and can kind of be like an ear to for people. If they have a quick question, you can just answer it really quickly. So it feels a lot more productive and creative and rewarding to work with business owners and entrepreneurs in that way.
Right. And it seems to me like, just off the bat, looking at it and knowing you and seeing what you've done online and everything like that, that you have an interesting, angle on the market, if you might say that, in that you are an entrepreneur yourself and what you're doing with Smart Business Revolution. Do you think that obviously, would you say that helps you in terms of getting clientele? Because people see that you're doing your own entrepreneurial pursuits, and so they know they can relate to you. Does that help you at all?
That's a good question. I think it probably has with some. There are certainly some people who've come to me who said, "Hey, I've checked out what you're doing online, and I have this legal issue. Can you help me with that?" And so much of the way we communicate and keep in touch with people is done online these days. So, for example, I contribute to the Huffington Post, and I write these articles, and it's a great excuse to just put yourself out there and to remind people of what it is you do. So what I tend to find is I'll write like a feature on someone on the Huffington Post, and then I'll post it to my LinkedIn and Twitter and Facebook and stuff like that. And I don't know who all's reading it, but people in my network are reading it. And then often like 3-4 weeks later, I'll get a phone call from one of them who needs help with some legal issue. And they wouldn't have thought of me if they hadn't read that article. So that's where the real value comes in, is it's a real subtle way of reminding people of what it is you do and that you're available. And then the next time an opportunity comes up and they need to either recommend you or they need your services, then they think of you because you've been in front of them recently.
Sure. And actually, that's a good point to bring up for all the listeners that are entrepreneurs, aspiring entrepreneurs and aspiring artists, in terms of, one, getting your name out there, but also I'd say, two, which I find interesting listening to you, what you just said there about the Huffington Post, is it sounds like you're pushing your content out there in the right medium and the right format and to the right audience, so that it helps you succeed and helps people contact you. So I guess what I'm saying is you're approaching it in the right way to gather the audience or the tribe that is important to you. So you're not just spitting out something in some random area online where nobody will find you. You're being pretty particular, it sounds like, about what content you produce and where you produce it.
That's right, and that's a key point. And I've certainly made my mistakes along the way, trying to not really targeting the right areas. And it tends to happen sometimes. Maybe you meet someone at a social event, a face-to-face thing, and so then you get to know them, and so then you start hanging out around their blog, and you start thinking about, maybe I'll interview them for my audience. But you really have to be choosy about these things, because every different thing you do sends a message to your audience, or you want it to, because you want all your efforts to be building towards the end result that you want. And for me personally, the end result that I want is I want people who are small business owners or entrepreneurs who are interested in interacting and talking about those issues that are relevant to that audience. And so, me going and hanging out on a fitness blog is not going to be the right fit.
Right, exactly.
But on the other hand, me interviewing someone who started a fitness business or who's got a wildly successful fitness website, that's interesting to my audience, because my audience, when I do, my podcast audience in particular, are other business owners, and they like to hear what other business owners are up to, even if it's in a different field, because a lot of times there are similarities between what it is they're doing and what others are doing. So that in that way it can be appropriate. But I've certainly made mistakes along the way.
Sure. No, I totally get that. I'm constantly, the question comes up in my mind anytime I create something is, what is the point of this that I'm doing, or this piece of content that I'm creating, or this interview in particular, for example, like, what am I trying to get at with this? And obviously for me, it comes back down to, In the Trenches is a podcast on creativity, but also pursuing those difficult creative paths in life. So entrepreneurship, art, anything that requires that hard inner creative work that honestly I don't think most people appreciate just how hard it is, except those who are doing it. And that's why I call it In the Trenches, right? So you and I are in the trenches.
It's a great metaphor. It's a great name for it. And you're right. It is very difficult. It's being creative is a slog sometimes, and a lot of people who are trying to produce creative works, it often doesn't pay well until you're at the really high echelon.
Exactly.
And so you're doing it on the side, you're doing it around family or relationships or friendships, or you're doing it in the morning before your job, or in the evening after your job, or while you're at work, or something like that. And it's a real slog. You got to remain real committed to it.
Yeah, I've always found it just kind of fascinating, because I was actually thinking about writing a blog post on this. I don't know if I'll get around to it, but just how it seems to be human nature that we look at all the successful people that have already done it, and we say, wow, look at these guys that have already made it, these guys and girls that are up there that are at the top. How do they do it? And then you might hear a little bit about their backstory, and it's like, well, I did A and then B and then C. But what you don't really see is that day-to-day grind, is that they were probably grinding it out for years. And it seems like that's the part that's often overlooked. And we see these people that are successful, but we don't see the day-to-day just absolute battle that they had to go through every step of the way.
Yeah, and I've been fortunate, especially living in San Francisco, that I've gotten to know a number of people who are very successful online. And, the slog continues. It doesn't ever end. There might be some ways in which they can stop doing certain things, but they're quickly filled up with other things they need to do, like keeping their tribe active and involved and engaging with them. I mean, I know Pat Flynn, who I interviewed recently and did a Huffington Post article on, and he gets hundreds and hundreds of emails and tweets and Facebook messages and YouTube messages and everything a day, and it occupies a huge amount of his time. I know it's very difficult for him, so it's a real challenge. So in a lot of ways, it doesn't get easier for people as they get larger. It actually gets harder, and then you have to start working with contractors and having other people come on who help you to manage all that. So it can get very difficult. I mean, that's just something you have to consider, that the creative process, if you find it difficult now, in a lot of ways, it can be easier if you're on your way up, if you haven't got a big audience of people at that point.
Absolutely. 2 points I want to touch on there is one, I think that was something I was particularly focused on myself when I started, was just that, hey, I can fail a million times and who's going to see it, right? This small audience, when I first started out, if anybody, and when you think about it that way, when you're just starting out, you can fail, and there's no real pressure. I mean, there is, we always create internal pressure, but the truth is, it's something that I think anybody starting out should definitely deeply value, the fact that they can do a lot of creative, interesting things that might not work. Whereas those who are established with a particular brand or a particular spot in the entrepreneurial world, or artistic world are kind of stuck. We're not stuck. That's probably a bad way to put it, but they've already established themselves, so they can't really do as much creative, groundbreaking, status quo challenging stuff as the small person starting out. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's absolutely true. And I think you should embrace those failures because you can learn so much from doing those sorts of things. But it all starts with just getting yourself out there.
Absolutely.
It starts with writing that blog post or writing a guest blog post or, starting a podcast and interviewing people and practicing because, I'm sure the first time you jumped out of a helicopter, you didn't do it as well as the 100th time. Right?
Yeah, exactly. So, it's very true.
So, we're not all naturally, or maybe you're naturally good at that. I don't know, but
no, I was going to say I'm actually terrified every time I jump out. I am. It's every time I do it. It's always scary. But I think that's why it relates to entrepreneurship so well too.
Well, and it keeps you tight too. It keeps you tight. Yeah.
Yep. Absolutely.
I mean, so people who are actors who are on, live productions on Broadway, they're terrified before they go on stage every time.
Yep. And that's the thing. I mean, I guess you could argue that maybe with enough experience that goes away, but I know I've met some people that's not the case. It's always scary. And this goes for anything. I mean, I'm not just talking about helicopters, but anything that's scary to the person, going on stage, being in front of an audience, trying to do something creative and putting your work out there. Like these are all creative, scary things. And to me, that fear has never subsided, but I know that I can deal with it. And every time I deal with it, it's just another reminder in the back of my mind. Well, I've done it before. I could do it again. And that's it. Like it never gets easier, but I do have that reminder now, and I built up that experience. But it doesn't actually ever get less scary. I guess it's the best way to
that
put it.
Adrenaline is the greatest thing in the world. I think that in a lot of ways, I say this to people all the time who are struggling in a particular profession or job or career or something that they're not enjoying that much, is you need to harness that, because the worst thing that can happen to you is to be just ambivalent or to be just accept what you have when you're not totally satisfied with it. There are so many people that, maybe they're unhappy in a particular job that they're in or in a lot in life that they're in. And so they go and get a new job, and then it's more satisfactory, but it's still not what they really want, but it's acceptable. And that's, in my opinion, that's the worst possible thing. So I'm always saying to people, if you're unhappy with your lot in life or your job or whatever, harness that to mobilize yourself to write that book or to start that blog or to start that podcast or to go back to grad school or to go to law school or to join the United States military or whatever it is that you need to do that's going to make you a happier person in life. You really need to and then you need to harness that adrenaline and that emotion that's inside of you so that you can be a more true expression of who you want to be.
Absolutely. It reminds me of Thoreau's quote, the mass of men lead lives of quiet desperation. And when you are, I know so many people that get fed up with their jobs, that get fed up with whatever they have in life, but you're right. I see so many of them just really just say, well, but I'm going to accept that this is just what I've got, and it's just something I got to deal with. But I think there's a lot of power in harnessing that dissatisfaction to go create something, honestly.
Yeah.
I think that's where some of the most brilliant creations come from, is that dissatisfaction and harnessing that energy and that, like you said, adrenaline into something productive. I think there's a lot of brilliance that comes out of that.
Yeah, and you get a feeling of satisfaction off of a job well done in a way that you probably don't in other ways in your life. I know for me personally, that's why I write, is because when I'm done with a piece and I ship it and it's available online for people to read, or it's available in print for people to read, and people read it, and then I get feedback from people that they enjoyed what I wrote, that's just really powerful to me. And I love that feeling, and it lasts for a little while and eventually it dissipates, and then I got to write something else.
Yeah. Yep. It's so funny. It's so true. That's exactly how I feel too. Every time I publish, or even on my podcast, or on the podcast, but then on the blog and anything else that I do, it's for that short. As soon as it's funny though. I go through a certain, I don't know what you call it, like a certain stages of creation, and in the beginning, it's a lot of excitement with the initial idea. And then I start to work on it and I'm not so excited anymore. And then I'm like halfway through it and I'm like, this is awful. And then I'm towards the end, I'm like, I should just give up. And then I ship it and I'm like, that was terrible. And then I look at it again and I'm like, okay, that wasn't so bad. And then it's time to start again.
Yeah, that's a great framework. That's pretty much how it feels a lot of the time. Well, I commonly, I don't know who said it, but someone said that no writing is ever finished. It's just abandoned. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's how I feel about a lot of stuff that I do. I just abandon it, and then you look, I mean, if I'm working on a book right now, and I'm hoping to complete it, mostly write it and complete it first quarter of next year. And when I finally do, I know that it'll be done. It'll be on a shelf. And if I pick it up, I'm going to want to mark it up and rewrite it. It'll never be finished, It's just the way it is.
I totally agree. I'm the same way with everything I do. And it's kind of the curse. But that's also why in a very specific context, blogging is kind of interesting because it forces you to ship. And I mean, I guess you can still, I've done this before. This is how bad I am. I've gone back days or weeks later into old content I've written. I've rewritten it. I don't know why, because it's already published. But I'm like, I don't like how I said that. And it's not like anybody else is really going to notice, especially if it's been out there for weeks or months. But I don't know. It's something I got to deal with on a personal scale. My perfectionist attitude on those kind of things. So it's kind of difficult to deal with. Yeah,
and that's the hard thing about a blog is it's so easy to go in and change it, right? It's easier if it's somewhere else or if it's in print or something, because then it's like, oh, well, I can't change it now. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, let's jump into your book a little bit. Tell us a little bit more about that. We were talking beforehand, for the listeners out there, we were just talking about it just before this interview started, and I found it a pretty fascinating take on entrepreneurship and the angle that you're coming from. So, John, tell us about that.
Sure. Yeah. Thanks. Well, at the heart of it, and I didn't mention this when we were talking about the Smart Business Revolution, but at the heart of it is really who are you serving and how can you provide value and assistance to them? And my clients, I work with mostly entrepreneurs and business owners, and I started reading business books because I thought it would be helpful to have those different perspectives when I'm working with my clients. And I've read so many good books by Jim Collins and Dan Pink and Malcolm Gladwell and all these different authors. And I realized that nearly every metaphor for business success has been written about already. You take war, the military, athletics is a big one, athletic competition, coaching. You even get down to rock climbing, which is something Jim Collins writes about frequently, or even infectious disease. The Tipping Point by Malcolm Gladwell was talking about how infectious disease is a metaphor for business in many ways. But I realized that no one had really done a thorough review of how political strategy and tactics in campaigns and even in governing can instruct and is instructing and informing businesses, and how businesses are using those types of techniques to great success. And so what I've been doing is I've been interviewing people who have inhabited both worlds, both politics and business, and ways in which they use techniques that they use in the political world, also in the business world. And it can be, it's everything from branding to, having a core purpose for your campaign, your candidate, or your business, differentiation, discipline, ways in which campaigns are disciplined and how that affects things. Campaigning, all those, these are all issues that are relevant both to the political world and to the business world. And I think that they can be really good examples for people who are entrepreneurs and who maybe have a little bit of political junkie in them and like to see examples and ways in which, really practical, actionable advice that they can use for their business. So it's aimed to be an entertaining book because I'm going to use lots of stories, but it also is at its core is hopefully going to be a helpful book that will help people to think about ways they can improve their own business.
Well, just listening to your description of it, I'm already excited, and I'll be lining up to pre-order.
Thank you. All right. That sounds good.
Absolutely, John. Maybe we'll have you on the show when you do get to the publishing point. Are you actually looking to do it conventionally, or how are you going about that? I'm curious.
It's a great question. I'm not sure, and I've done a bunch of interviews with people recently, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on it since you just publish your book through the Amazon Kindle platform. I'm tempted to do the Amazon Kindle platform. I'm probably leaning more towards self-publishing, honestly.
Right. No, I think there's a lot of power in that. And it's something I just recently did, and I had a decent amount of success with it. And I enjoy the amount of creative control I have over it. There's also an underlying power to it, too, which is that just because you initially self-publish it doesn't mean you couldn't eventually pick up a publisher that way. Well, obviously there's dozens of case studies on that, but one of them that pops in my head, even though I'd rather not mention it, would be like the 50 Shades of Yellow or whatever the book is called. I'm just kidding. I know it's 50 Shades of Gray, but that was initially just a self-published book, and then it obviously started selling, and a major publisher picked it up to publish all of them.
Well, but the funny thing though is that I'll bet the authors, even when they go to traditional publishers, they aren't making any more money, because I've actually negotiated on behalf of my clients book contracts, and I've looked very closely at them with traditional publishers, and a lot of them are not very good. I mean, the terms are horrible. You get like 10% of the sales, and
if that.
Yeah, I mean, it's really, really low. So you can sell a book for $9.99 with a traditional publisher, and you probably would make more money selling that book for 99 cents on the Amazon Kindle platform, where you're making 70% of that 99 cents. You'd probably make more money selling it for 99 cents than $9.99. That's what a lot of people found. There's an author named John Locke who's had a bunch of success, who is pretty well known for that.
Yep.
So.
Yeah, I was actually just kind of crunching some of my own numbers recently, basing some of the money I made off of self-publishing versus had I had this little book that I put together, been published by a big publisher, right? This fictional kind of what if, basing it on some generic contracts that I've seen out there. Say for a trade paperback, it's like you get 6% or 7% of the first 1,000 copies sold or something like that. And it's totally subjective based on the publishing house and the deals. But just based on those numbers, I broke it down. I would have had to sell like something like 500 to 1,000 books to have made the amount of money I made selling just the less than 100 that I've sold so far.
Yeah.
It just puts it in perspective. You realize you don't need that. It kind of blows your mind, I guess, when you put it that way.
Well, I think right now there's a huge opportunity in the market for businesses that kind of are not traditional publishing houses, but are serving that market of people who want to write on the Amazon Kindle platform and other platforms out there. And I actually interviewed some guys, Hollis Carter and Johnny Andrews, on my podcast that started a publishing house called Velocity House Publishers, which does that, which partners with authors, but helps them with all the other aspects that an author doesn't want to get involved in, including getting down to the level of even testing different cover art to see what's going to sell more effectively, so that when they finally get it published to the Amazon Kindle store, that they know that the cover art that they've selected is going to be very effective, or testing different titles, testing different subtitles, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, that's actually my next project is a boutique publisher like that. So I'm very excited to do something like that and take it back to that level where publishing is very intimate with the getting into the nitty gritty with the author, and that it's a mutually beneficial relationship where it's more artisan as opposed to mass media. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and Guy Kawasaki he prefers calling it artisanal publishing to self-publishing, which I think is a great term, emphasizing the craft nature of it.
Exactly. So yeah, no, I'm excited to be working on that, and who knows, maybe I'll be able to publish your book, John. We'll talk later about that, though.
Sounds good. Yeah, but no, I'm excited about it. Writing a book that's one of the failures of my life so far, that I haven't written a book, and I've always wanted to. I've always been a writer, and I've always wanted to get a book done, and I've just never had the time or the focus I've started books before but never finished them. And so this is one that I'm really kind of committed to, because it complements everything I'm doing professionally. And but it's still a war, as you know. It's still a war to get it done. I've got a 2.5-year-old son at home and a wife and a busy practice and all kinds of other stuff going on. So you got to carve out the time to do it.
And on that note, thank you so much for joining us today. I know you got to get going pretty soon. I have one more question for you, though, if that's all right. Yeah. Well, one, I would also say too about your book. You mentioned you're not. You wish you had written it already, or that you had already written a book, but it sounds like you're in the perfect position right now in life to create the book that you're meant to write, which is another way to view it too. So I'm excited to see what you come up with. But also on that note, what would you say in terms of for the aspiring artist, for the aspiring entrepreneur, for the aspiring writer, just starting out? Do you have any piece of advice for them?
Yeah. One thing that I've done recently that has really helped tremendously has been planning. I think the most difficult thing to do as a writer or an artist is to just have a blank, empty canvas in front of them and say, I'm going to sit down and I'm going to start creating art. Because we all, as human beings, have got different responsibilities, different things we want to achieve. Mm-hmm. And no matter what medium you're working on, no matter what art you're working on, there are probably different projects that you have in mind and different types of projects that you want to complete. Be it maybe you have an article on a particular topic and then an article on another topic and then an ebook you want to write, all these different things. But what I started doing is planning a lot more deliberatively in terms of work that I have to do, and even down to the point of identifying time in my schedule when I'm going to work on writing. And I found that makes a big difference, devoting that taking the extra time, and it could be 15 minutes at the beginning of your day, or it could be a half an hour at the beginning of your week, to plan out how you're going to spend time your week. And you take a look and see, okay, oh, good. So on Tuesday, Wednesday, and Friday, I can spend a half an hour at 7 a.m. working on this article that I want to work on. And this is my highest priority. This is the article that I really want to get done. And taking that time in advance to plan and to plot ahead, I think makes a big difference. And you end up getting a lot more done than you would if you hadn't done the planning in advance.
I couldn't agree more. I'm the same way in that I know how much more effective it is when I do that. I'm liable not to, of course. Some weeks I'm just totally off and I'm just seeing what happens. But the weeks where I structure it, it's night and day. So I completely agree. I think that's great advice, John.
Yeah. Well, great. Well, thanks for having me on, Tom. I really enjoyed it.
Absolutely, John. Is there anything you want to say in terms of shout outs or putting your work out there where people can find you? And I'll make sure to include it in the show notes.
Sure, yeah. Best place to check me out is smartbusinessrevolution.com. And, that's where I write my blog pieces. I have links to other pieces elsewhere, like in the Huffington Post. And, I interview entrepreneurs as well on there. I've interviewed Guy Kawasaki and Dan Pink, or authors and entrepreneurs, and I hope people will check it out. But thanks so much for having me on. It was a lot of fun.
Thank you so much, John. I really appreciate it. And that wraps up In the Trenches, Broadcast 11 with John Corcoran. If you're interested in the show notes or finding out more about John, go to tomworkus.com/broadcast11. That's broadcast 11. As always, I hope this inspires you to start, finish, and ship your next project and to create your life's work. If you're listening to this, you are the resistance.
Thank you for listening to In the Trenches. Your creative work doesn't stop here. Join the resistance, the small but growing army of entrepreneurs and artists putting a dent in the world at www.tommorkis.com. Never fight alone. Join the resistance.